Okay, week 13 prep, we're going to lead off with all flexibility work, static and dynamic, starting first with a catcher groin. This is for the adductors and groin. We're going to sit down in the stance there, really trying to drive the knees out. This is a static hold. We'll hold it for in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 seconds, pushing the knees out, trying to get a stretch in the groin. Next, we'll move to more dynamic movement, the shin grab. With the shin grab, we're trying to pull knee to chest there, and while stabilizing your stance, don't compensate at all by doing anything other than flexing through the hip. There should be no movement in the lumbar. That would be a rep count of working 8 to 10 on each hip. After that, we'll go to the quad pull. Now the quad pull here, we're standing tall. We're pulling the heel straight back to the glute. On each side, we'll advance forward. Notice there's no movement in the trunk. There'll be another progression in the following week where we'll do more than just pull it back. But right here, we're just pulling the heel straight back to the butt. We would do 10 on each side. Try not to deviate on posture on any of those reps. Now we'll go to a reverse lunge with an overhead raise. Right here we're getting long and tall. Should be feeling that in the backside hip flexor. Notice we're getting a good reach up top with the overhead movement. There's your thoracic extension up top. Again, the cueing there is long and tall. The trail glute should be firing to keep that hip extended. And we continue to lunge back with the overhead raise. That would be anywhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 reps on both sides. From there, we'll move on to our mobility work, starting with the rotational ankle sweep. We'll go to the wall here. Remember, the objective here is rotational mobility through the ankle. I'm going to accomplish that by keeping the foot still down low, sweeping the leg. Of course, the added benefit here is the dynamic flexibility through the groin. As long as that foot stays still, we're getting good rotational movement through the ankle. We perform the rep count on both sides for both ankles, aiming for 8 to 10 reps on both ankles. Next, we'll move on to the hip. We'll grab our plate for our driver movement. This is going to be the multiplanar raise and press driver lunge. We've done this in the past. Remember, on the linear movements, you're going to raise. So there's your thoracic extension up top with a good hip mobility. And we'll repeat that a couple times on each leg. Now to the left, remember your trail glute. And there's our lateral with the press, getting that lateral range of motion through the hip on both sides. We can also use the diagonal movement. As we open up, we're going to keep the base foot at 12 o'clock here as we open the hip on both sides. Now for that one, I would raise 5 times on both hips. I'd press laterally 5 times on both hips, and I'd press diagonally 5 times with both hips for the driver series. Next, we'll move on to hip rotation. This is a walking hip circle. We'll execute this a couple different ways with the knee going out to in. And notice here that we want to keep the trunk neutral as the hip rotates through. We can also rotate the opposite direction, in to out, all the while getting flexion in the hip, followed by good rotation. And you'd work for 8 to 10 reps on both hips there, working in both planes of movement. You can also reverse that pattern as well. So move on now to the thoracic spine. We'll go to a crouched rotation. So we'll take that position on the turf here, sitting back on the heels to lock the lumbar in, right hand behind the right ear, working for rotation, turn the shoulders with the head following. We'll get a rep count there, anywhere from 6 to 10 on both sides for your thoracic rotation. Now we'll move on to our activation and upper body segments, where we're first going to take the dumbbells. We'll perform the T. We've performed the Y in previous session. We're going to take a bent over position here, a little bit more bent over as we come down. And you should feel that chin's tucked. And then we'll come out wide there. The T is coming out wide, whereas the Y, you were coming out to a 45-degree angle. Remember, the key here is you're driving through your scaps there to get that activation in the lower trapezius and strengthen your upper backside muscles. From the T, we'll move on to a band horizontal pull apart. So any sort of elastic work you can get here, whether it's maybe it's your power bands or any sort of tubing you can have here. Again, we're driving through the shoulder blades here, keeping the scap set down and back to, again, turn on that lower trapezius right there. That would be a good, usually when I have the guys on a clock there for 20, 30 seconds, or you can just rep it out, say for 10 to 15 reps there to get that turned on. Next, we'll grab a couple different options here. We can go X-band walk or a monster walk. We'll show both. If you have enough of the power bands, that's the thin tubing right there for the power band. We're going to step into it. This is for glute activation, also a little bit of upper back activation as well. There's the X in the band right there. And it's a lateral step right there to get the glute turned on. It's a subtle step, but laterally right there, again, the upper back's turned on, the glutes are turned on. Or you can maybe have half of them doing the monster walk, where any sort of tubing you can get round down near the ankles. We'll take a deep stance here, squat down, and take short steps. And notice this one is in more of a squatted stance versus the tall stance of the X-band walk. And then we'll finish off our movement here with a lateral reaction crossover skip and a cross-under skip to a reaction go. So right here, we'll have them go a lateral reaction skip with a crossover, and he's reacting to a visual cue that you can't see, but just imagine, coaches, you're having him react to a visual cue, and when I say go, he turns and sprints opposite the other direction. Now you can also have him sprint in the same direction, whatever your preference is there. Also, we can do a lateral cross-under reaction skip, and again, following a visual cue, cross-under skip. Again, reacting to my visual hand signal, and when I say go, they'll sprint it out and finish out. Okay, so that's week 13. As we pick up in week 14, we'll start off with our flexibility series again, starting here with half kneeling adductor. And for that, we'll take the half kneeling stance. And right here, again, this is a static hold for the groin. You're going to sit your hips back, in step with the foot down, and in doing so, you'll find that good stretch point for the adductor. And of course, we perform that on both sides. Next, we'll introduce in the Spider-Man series a new movement. This is the elbow drop. So you'll take a typical Spider-Man stance. In this case right here, he's going to take his left arm and he's just going to load it down. Notice the flexion we're getting in the hip there. We'll just repeat that, again, working for flexion in the hip. We perform that on both sides using that stance. Next, we'll go to a quad pole tilt. So the comparison here is that we're going to pull and then we're going to tilt forward. That's going to get a little bit more length, also involving the flexor a little bit more. That's pretty good right there. You know, flat back, working a little more stability on the single leg too. Quad pull with the tilt. Now that's going to be followed by a Russian walk. Now the Russian walk is like a marching walk, only we're going to have a little thoracic rotation with it. Notice it is thoracic rotation. You get the opposite hand to the opposite foot, working dynamically through the hamstring there. Probably like to get 10 or so reps on both legs. Notice that just a subtle shoulder tilt up top to reach the foot. After that, we'll go into our ankle mobility, which is going to be a half kneeling adductor dip. So this is continuation from where we started flexibility for the day. And we just rocking that. Notice the heel stays down, looking at the range of motion through the ankle, but also some dynamic flexibility through the groin. And we perform that on both sides. Next, moving on to the hip, we'll go back to the driver. This will be a reach driver lunge. And we'll go through the same paths. There's the linear reach where you come around the leg, and we'll go on the left side linear now. Around the leg. And around the leg. Now we'll go right side lateral where you go inside. Again, moving through the hip. Very conscious of that, keeping the trunk stable. To the left side lateral now. Keeping the foot closed as we move through the hip, and we go diagonal right. Again, the plate comes inside the leg with the base foot staying at 12 o'clock, and then now the left side as well. You're probably looking to hit each one of those patterns 5 or 6 times in each path, each leg. After the driver series, we'll keep the driver for the single leg deadlift. This is a multi-planar driver deadlift, so we'll go down the middle, working on that hip range of motion there, and then he's going to tilt to his right and his left, working on that rotational mobility through the hip. There it is, angular. Notice as long as the foot stays neutral, you're working on different planes of movement through that hip while grooving that same single leg deadlift pattern. You'd hit each one of those angles maybe 5 times a piece. Next, we'll drop the driver. We'll move on to the thoracic spine with the bent over rotation. Here we'll take that flat back position, working to the bent over rotation where you're, there you go, where you're taking, turning a shoulder turn there, keeping the lumbar braced, leading the head is leading the hands. And we'll pick up with the upper body and activation on the next video.